right, everybody, welcome in part 2, Cannabiz Conversations with the Jeff Rawson Experience. I've got to tell you, if you haven't followed Jeff before or you don't know Jeff, you need to. You need to follow the guy. He's on. I see him on LinkedIn. That's where I follow him. That's what I'm into. Here in part 2, we're going to get into what Jeff's working on right now. But before we do that, we have to thank Fat Nugs Magazine for the sponsorship of today's episode. Their global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. And if you've ever read their magazines, you know what they're talking about. But right now, most important episode yet, or I shouldn't say episode, magazine edition yet. We're doing an episode. The edition is the Prisoners Edition. They're doing it with Freedom Grow, Beard Brothers, Jailed for Weed. Upcoming Prisoners Edition is going to include stories of past and present prisoners who are unfortunately in jail for a plant, which nobody should be in jail for this plant. They're doing their part. You should do yours. I think for as little as $250, you can get involved in this. You need to go ahead and do it. We've done it here at Cannabiz Conversations. We encourage the rest of you to do the same. All right, part 2, Jeff. You want to get into the science of cannabis, right? And that's crazy to me because up until really following guys like you, Cody Peterson, a couple other folks, I don't really understand the science. I've just enjoyed the plant my whole life. So let's talk about it, Jeff. What the Institute of Cannabis Science, give me the origin story of it, the 30,000 foot, quick view of that.
Yeah. Well, I started, as I told you before, my scientific inclinations for the longest time were very unapplied. And I was always a fairly esoteric scientist who looked for useless stuff to do. So I reached this point in my life where I wanted to be good for something, and so I took this. I had a PhD in chemistry, and I had done one like postdoc, they call it, just like a, I don't know, final mentorship. And I took a second postdoc, and I went to Harvard, and I studied under a chemistry professor there who was well known for touching on a whole lot of different applications. That's kind of like what he's famous for. His name is George Whitesides. And I tried all different projects, which he did not like and did not approve of. And I became kind of a heel of the group. And I started using I started just hiding in my lab all the time and using e-cigs, like cannabis e-cigs that I bought online. And I got sick with E-Valley. I got the vaping illness, and I went to the hospital for a couple of weeks. And after I got out of the hospital, my advisor, George Whitesides, would only talk to me about cannabis electronic cigarettes. And so I realized that was my project now. And I started studying.
Jeff, because he wanted to understand what had happened to you, or he wanted you to understand what had happened to you, or was it collective where you were both like, what's up here?
He's interested in everything. He's just interested in, interested in it because he's interested in anything that's new and changing the world,
Got it.
Like, here's this thing that is fairly new and it's growing in popularity rapidly, right? To him, this is like kind of how he taught. This is what he's known for, and kind of like why people go to be mentored by him is he sort of teaches you how to notice what are like the growing areas, which is what you really need to know as a scientist, right? Because you don't want to start doing research after everyone else is already good at it. You know what I mean?
It's the undercurrent of
if everyone else already knows all the answers, and then you show up, like, unless you've got some really new and different perspective, right? You're just not going to have a spot. So it's good to show up early. It's best to be first. That's what he literally would tell us, that it is best to be first, right? You want to be the first with something. So this was like a really novel idea to me as like a guy who sought like the most esoteric thing to do. Usually the way I picked my projects in the past was, what did 3 other people try and not succeed? So, and then I worked for this guy and he says, well, what you should do is just try to be the first person to do something, but not because it's hard, just because nobody had the idea before. Because then other people will admit it, other people will emulate you,
Yeah.
and imitate you, and follow along really easily, and you'll have been the first. So yeah, so he was interested in, so he said, everything. I mean, he kind of turned me on to this realization that everything about cannabis safety, cannabis health, like all of it is like, it's almost all unknown because the research has always been cut off. But suddenly what's going to happen is people are going to be able to just start doing that research. So it's a great opportunity to get in on the ground floor. That was his literal, I mean, I know that is exactly how he was thinking of it. He was thinking Jeff could get in on the ground floor if he does this. But then the other thing he noticed was I got really engaged and I did a really good piece of writing about my experience getting a Valley. So he said, all right, Jeff can do good work and write good things if it's about something he cares about like this. So to him, it was a way to find something I could do. And to me, it was a way to find something that I cared about enough, I think, to do. I wanted to find some kind of an applied science where I would be impacting public health and helping people. That was what I didn't like about doing esoteric stuff, was it started to just feel like it was for me, and it wasn't for other people. And it was too self-indulgent. It didn't feel right. So, so that's what got me into this. And I founded the Institute because through the course of doing research on cannabis stuff, I had to collaborate quite a lot with testing labs. And when you work with people at testing labs, it's not long before they start telling you these stories of like their clients who just like leave them one day because they fail one test or like tell them that they need like higher THC numbers or something like that. And they just complain. And, like at the time, the company was still fairly successful, but they're like, oh man, we're losing business and we don't know what's going to happen next. And we try to talk to regulators and nobody does anything. And I had this idea that, well, what we need to do, nobody does anything because like we're just throwing words at them. We need to show them examples and demonstrations of what actually happens. So like, let's measure it and demonstrate that the thing is happening. And then like, maybe they'll listen. So I started wanting to do research projects on it. And I realized that is what Consumer Reports does. I always liked that organization. As you know, Consumer Reports is a foundation that publishes a magazine, right? And so I realized, well, we need a Consumer Reports for cannabis. I mean, that's a nonprofit organization. They're most famous for a magazine, but they publish a variety of different, analyses, right, of consumer products, right? And they have scientists. They really test them in a lab. So, and
I'm a car guy, Jeff. So Consumer Reports has always been something that's been mentioned among safety in the automotive industry.
Yeah, Consumer Reports was revolutionary for auto safety in particular. And some of their work in the early days of that foundation or organization was surprisingly very controversial, and they got sued.
Yeah, well, a lot of it became around the additional safety that they thought was required. I mean, I always joke airbags was their idea, not the manufacturer. Those guys didn't want to put more in there, spend more money on that, get into how those worked. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of concern. I remember I started working in the late 90s, and one of our first managers was like, "Don't ever let a customer tell you about Consumer Reports. It's BS. Just stick to the facts." And it's like, that's their facts. You know what I mean? People's perception is their own reality, and you can argue it, sure, but it's still their reality.
Yeah. So I started out like, I guess, like just doing research on cannabis and safety and thinking about it in terms of like, oh, this is interesting science and a lot of new important stuff to figure out. And then I started doing work. Then I founded a nonprofit a couple of years later, I guess, to as I started understanding that we needed communication direct to consumers and direct to regulators, and that there was that there's this whole missing like civic space in cannabis right now, where we've basically got some regulators and they hear from a whole bunch of people who are in the industry, right? But nearly all those people in the industry like sell weed, and they don't have,
You can't be unbiased, Jeff. You can't be unbiased about your weed when you're the one selling the weed. It's
yeah,
impossible to do. It's an impossible separation to make. Someone else has to be there for the consumer. Someone has to middleman that discussion. I know people feel like, oh, it's just more people involved, this and that. Right, I get it. But we are finding out that e-vapes and concentrates and other things can make people ill. There are things going on. I know no one wants to hear it. We always stand on the cannabis has killed no one. I mean, cool, great, whatever. Like, true or false doesn't matter. We can assume the percentages by data are very, 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 very low, if anything. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And it doesn't mean that people don't get sick. And it doesn't mean that Jeff wasn't in the hospital for days on end because he was consuming cannabis products. It's okay, people. I'm a baseball nerd, Jeff. Absolute baseball nerd. You talk about being a purist earlier on part one. That's who I am in baseball. I'm currently taking a break because my team sucks and has been lying to me for years. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Point is, Hall of Fame best ever will fail at their job 70% of the time as a hitter, and you'll end up in the Hall of Fame. You will fail 70% of the time. You will be the best of the best to ever have done it. So anyone who tries to run at 80, 90, 100%, they're lying to somebody, Jeff. And that's what consumers need to know about. Everyone can't bat 1,000.
Yeah. So, so now I think like, my, well, I guess as a nonprofit founder, I am actually an entrepreneur, but I'm pretty new to the entrepreneurial space. So like, I'm still like kind of an entrepreneur, like rookie, I kind of suck at it. And, but I realized that, entrepreneurial thinking is really needed, like on behalf of consumer safety and consumer protection. And this is like this kind of safety is actually a thing that we have to like market in a way,
Yeah, man. Yeah. Jeff, it's not
safety is a pretty crappy product.
Well, right, so, but go back to Consumer Reports, right? Consumer Reports, the 5-star crash test rating, the this, the that, like that. There has to be a visual to go along with what you're asking me. And I think I may have had this discussion with Trent on episode 1, where it was just like, look, dude, I go to the grocery store and there's a tag that says USAID organic, right? I've done my research. I know what that means. Okay. I know what goes into that label, the gold seal. Yeah, right. And I know how hard that would be to get to cannabis, but like that's where I'm at. I don't want to walk in and ask for your COA.
Those are the systems I'm starting to learn about now, and what to think about, right? Like, because I agree with you. Some of the first things that you want to see happen are like maybe some diversification of the product space in terms of like different tiers, right? And that could be, in food, we see that with organic, right? So if you look at how that happens, right, basically there are a set of standards established that define what organic is. And then there are independent organizations usually that are actually often nonprofits or not-for-profits that certify whether or not those standards have been followed and put that stamp on the product. And, we have some of the same systems in Massachusetts cannabis already at hand to label some product with a couple of these things, right? I mean, I guess this kind of, I can use this as sort of maybe an entry towards the Institute of Cannabis Science and our initiatives for this year, specific to cannabis testing in Massachusetts. So we have a couple of different projects we're working on, but one of the really important ones is that at the beginning of this year, we sent 4 recommendations to the Cannabis Control Commission, and these are moves that we believe can be made relatively quickly to basically shift incentives in favor of consumers who are looking for high quality cannabis, and shift incentives in favor of producers and testing labs who want to provide good quality and honest information to consumers. So the first of these moves is to automate the handling of certificates of analysis, all those COAs. Those are the documents that actually report all the test results from the testing lab to the retailer or to anybody.
Right. Well, and I'm going to pause you here. As a consumer, I love to hear people talk about this in the ether of the cannabis industry, where they're just like, yeah, just go ask them for their COA. I got news for you. Nobody's fucking doing that, Jeff. No consumer's walking in going, I think I'll take the bubble trouble up. Before I do, though, can I get that COA real fast? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Bullshit. Yeah. I know it sounds fun. It's not. Why do you think they put all the nutrients on the candy bar on the back of the wrapper? Yeah. Because that's where you're going to look, if you look at all, but they are absolved of having to tell you what's in there because they told you, you just didn't look. So yeah, this idea of people asking for COAs is a pipe dream, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I always hear that from, and I always hear from retailers that like they don't hear people asking for it. But the thing is that if it's available to me, especially like what's most important actually usually is what's available to the consumer before they make the purchase and available to them online. So the thing that's most useful in my eyes about having access to that certificate of analysis for the consumer is the consumer then they can see what lab tested their cannabis. And when they find that, and if consumers can know that and start thinking about and being aware of the testing labs, that could be a big advantage for certain labs that may make consumer focused decisions, right? Instead of decisions that favor their clients, the growers.
So, agreed. But Jeff, I ask you this as sort of a follow-up, sort of maybe even a challenge to that. But really, what do you think it's going to take to get the consumer educated enough to A, give a shit, B, ask, and C, have it easy enough to understand? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I think
how do you get through that part?
I think making it simple and easy to access is one important step. And but I agree with you that there's a slow and painful slog of consumer education. All right. Like it's not quick, right? But as people are learning, right? One of the exciting things that we're learning as we start seeing more high quality science on cannabis is that there's a big role that's played by compounds in cannabis other than THC. And so people are becoming more interested and curious. And it turns out that it's quite common for one strain of weed to have about 1.5% Burmass, say cannabigerol or cannabigerol. Sorry, I like my way. Right, and others have way more cannabichromene. Right, and this probably is going to start mattering to people. People will start noticing that actually that one versus the other makes a difference. But they're only going to know if they know. They need to know the contents, right?
All right, Jeff. Well, then I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have a large scale consumer consumption event where people can almost do like the Coke challenge. You know what I mean? Where you can almost just be like, all right, take this, cool. And then like, all right, here's the lab. Here's the people. Start walking people through COA. And Jeff, from a selfish perspective, I don't know if you're ever looking for content ideas, but to go through those, I don't know if you've done them, but to maybe take a COA, maybe show people like, this is where I would look. This is what I would do. I think it'd be very helpful, and to get people comfortable with that document, because again, in their other vices, let's just use alcohol. That's never coming up, Jeff. That's
Sure.
never going to happen. No one's gonna be like, can I get the brewer certificate? No, it doesn't exist. So no, and that's what I mean when I try to take people's vices and then make it where, what other vice do they have? What are they asking in that vice, and how do they act at that vice, while remembering that this vice is brand new to the public vice world, as it were. We're what, 10 years into legal from Colorado, California. So, we're still infants in this whole game of cannabis.
Yeah. But and I respect what you're saying. I mean, I agree. Most people are not going to look at this, but the fact of the matter is that it's a couple of fairly simple, straightforward steps to automate all of this handling. And right now, the inefficiency of the system is causing its own headaches for a lot of the stakeholders who are in it. So, you can actually save them a lot of trouble by just streamlining the whole thing. And this access has a lot of additional salutary benefits, right? Most consumers aren't going to think of looking at it very often, right? But like if they do have an adverse effect from a product, they're going to become quite curious, right?
Correct.
And so those people might want it, right?
Yeah. And
the other real benefit, this might be just a little selfish, but I mean, when you put all these certificates of analysis online and address them by QR codes, you make them accessible to activists like me who want to be able to associate producers with labs and talk about that. So
this is what I'm talking about.
You make it easier to call people out or to celebrate people. Again, remember, sometimes I just observe from my perspective as an independent industry stakeholder that some people just seem to have especially great ethics, and they really follow through on things well, and I see it, and I would love to be able to say it sometimes, right?
I agree with that. And as someone who's been in sales their whole life, part of selling something is the presentation. And so I think about, you and I both agree, maybe consumers don't know, won't ask. But if it was a part of the retail environment, if it's a part of the retail discussion, I haven't spoken with this any dispensary. I'm just literally thinking of this as to say, I know we're worried about our bud tenders acting like doctors and I get all that. That's fine. But here's the thing. What if it was more like, hey, just before we get into this, these are your two choices. Cool. Well, I'm getting those ready because it's a process. They got to go unlock jars, get a manager's approval. I mean, it isn't that easy. There's a downtime. And in downtime, you should use to educate. You should be in your dispensary. You should say, these are the recent COAs on those products. Thank you so much. Here you go. A couple of highlights. You know what I mean? A look here, look there, whatever. Because I think it is important, Jeff. I think it's extremely important, the work that you're doing. And again, you've been very gracious with your time. I want to wrap up by asking you two things. Number one, when you give off 4 initiatives to the government, lack of a better term, what is your expectation of success rate? And do you have any decisions that have been made on the recs that you've already sent?
Well, honestly, I had no idea whether this was even really a good idea. I mean, my entire thought process was that I had recently attended a roundtable and we talked some about what should be done next and regarding testing, and that involved Kim Roy, one of the commissioners. And so that had gotten me thinking about, all right, well, it's about the end of the year. What would I say are the things we should really do for next year, right? And it occurred to me, nothing, like, there's a place where nothing ever gets done except for when it absolutely has to at the very last minute, and they call it Congress. And the way that they get that stuff done is they take a bunch of different things that really have to happen, and they tie them together and they make them a pill and they swallow it. And I was like, well, maybe I can do that my own way and I can take these 4 things, and each of these things, I feel like they stand on their own, but like they really like they kind of go together, and they have different balance. Like some of them seem to appeal more to some stakeholders than others.
Sure.
But if you take all 4 together, then it adds up. And I thought, well, maybe I can make the same sort of a pill. And the reception has been surprisingly like pretty good. I mean, I sure hear like complaints, but like a lot of people are like, yeah, we should do those 4 things. And they get interested because one of the points tickles them the best. But like they end up usually being able to go along with the other things.
Well, that's because you wrap it up in a pill and you're smart enough to know what people want to hear, Jeff. You might call you might say
you're nice to say that. You're nice to call me smart that way. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to tell you. You call yourself a rookie entrepreneur. You say you're not very good at it. Look, I've been an entrepreneur 20 years. I'm really fucking good at it, but it's for profit, Jeff. And so it would be a challenge for me to put my entrepreneurial brain on in something that is for nonprofit. And I know that sounds crazy for people to hear, but it would be a challenge. So if you're ever looking for another ear to bend or someone to chat with on the entrepreneurial side, man, I will offer it up here. I love the idea of what you're doing, and I see a broader application. It's not to me. Yes, you're perfecting it in the state you live, the state you do business, etc. But it's a simple pass across to the next state, to the next opportunity. And really where I'd like to see it most is talking to those people who are not yet there or just having gotten started, being in the recommendation space before they go fuck it up, Jeff. That's what I think would be really, really cool to see you involved in, man. So please keep up the great work. Continue to tell folks all about what you're doing. With that in mind, Jeff, where can people learn about you and the Institute of Cannabis Science?
Well, you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's like my favorite social media platform. And our website is cansci.org, CANNSCI.org. And you can find several useful consumer guides there on subjects like potency, inflation, and pesticides.
Well, we know how important pesticides are on this show. We kick the season off with Trent Hancock. There are a few who speak as passionately and with as much knowledge to back it up as that man. Mm-hmm. So, Jeff, man, thanks a lot. You've been absolutely phenomenal. This has been a very, very fun hour for me. I know it has been total for the guests or for the folks watching at home. So, thank you so much, man.
All right, thank you, Sean. It's been great.
As we wrap up this edition, remember Fat Nugs Magazine. They brought us today's sponsorship. We love them. They are the best. Right now, working on the Prisoners Edition with Fat Nugs, Beard Brothers, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed. This upcoming Prisoners Edition is the most important work they have done to date, highlighting folks who are incarcerated and have been incarcerated for a plant, which we all agree is completely unacceptable. No one should be in jail for a plant. Remember, on this show, our goal is always to remove the stigma and uplift the plant. We hope you do your part to do the same. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you again next week.